responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Development cooperation has always been a priority for the OAS. The OAS SETI works with all member states to identify common challenges and define solutions through policy dialogue, which is transformed into action through technical cooperation initiatives. Policy dialogue is central to our work in development. The OAS SETI convenes development leaders in 11 ministerial meetings and high-level processes on priority areas such as competitiveness, labor, education, among others. Technical cooperation initiatives emerge from ongoing dialogue and are therefore established with built-in political support. All of our actions place people at the center, generating a multiplier effect in the region. We enhance human capacity by working with key stakeholders. This strengthens institutions, improving policies and programs, benefiting millions of people in the Americas. Our ability to deliver results relies on broad collaboration. Partnerships for Development, Cooperación Solidaria, is a unique OAS concept which recognizes that each member state, regardless of its size, wealth, or level of development, has value to share and can learn from others. This concept also includes close collaboration with other partners, amplifying our reach and impact. As we mark 70 years of work on development, we take a look back. This long evolution, driven by member states, has fine-tuned our unique model to support inter-American development. Today, all of our efforts fall into 5 strategic priorities: inclusive and competitive economies, sustainable development, education and human development, decent work for all, development cooperation, and partnerships. These are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the regional attainment of the 2030 Agenda. These priorities are also areas where the OAS SETI has extensive experience and proven impact. we have come a long way. But still have much work to do. "70 years ago, an inter-American dream and promise was enshrined in the OAS Charter. We can deliver on this promise. Our future leaders are counting on us."
Me and my kids have been there for over an year right now. And children are friends. It doesn't matter where they come from.
Nosotros estamos en una zona netamente selvática. La línea de adyacencia va desde el norte hasta el sur, va desde Modesto Méndez hasta Aguas Turbias, tanto en el norte como en el sur. Esta línea tiene 215 kilómetros de extensión.
De allí vino él, se buscó creo con los de la OEA y de allí vino el proyecto para acá, para Judá. Y fue que lo dieron el terreno y lo dieron todo lo que era mano de obra y el material para hacer las casas que están ahorita. Y por ese motivo estamos aquí viviendo todavía.
La misión continúa trabajando en la implementación de medidas de fomento de la confianza mientras se aguarda el resultado del reclamo que está atendiendo la Corte Internacional de Justicia por la disputa marítima, territorial e insular. Nuestra oficina en la zona de adyacencia realiza verificaciones a solicitud de ambos gobiernos, facilita reuniones y patrullajes conjuntos entre las Fuerzas Armadas y promueve una cultura de paz y cooperación entre las comunidades locales.
Children will be children and they have harmony. They don't see each other as a different country, but they see each other that they're growing together.
Este video fue producido con la ayuda financiera de la Unión Europea.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Mr. SG, and I will start this part of our proceedings with the recognizing the delegation of Ecuador.
Madam Chair, I thank you for the Executive Secretariat, her comments, Executive Secretary of SIM on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And it's so meaningful for us because this is something that affects women all over the place of all walks of society. Many women have been the victims of assault and different types of violence in different areas of the world, including, and then the impunity of the perpetrators and the stigmatization of the victims. So this is also reflected in labor, psychological violence, sexual, symbolic, and media violence. All types of violence is reflected in. This is all exercise against women and on social media and other digital media, and in their participation in politics, and it's an obstacle for achieving more equal societies and fair societies. And despite laws favoring their rights being enacted, but there needs to be proper implementation. There needs to be efforts made to break with this vicious cycle. So it is indispensable to have greater representation of women in decision-making bodies. And this would provide an essential contribution to deal with, for example, coronavirus. Women are disproportionately more vulnerable, and to take the most suitable measures to combat it. COVID-19 has increased this issue, particularly domestic violence has been on the rise since COVID-19 pandemic has broken out. They are unable to deal with the problems and provide the assistance they need through hotlines, etc. Over the last 20 years, women have accounted for a high percentage of the gross domestic product. The executive secretary of ECLAC said these fateful words that it is a women's face that is on the victims. Many citizens have been asking for aid from other persons, including their own partners or spouses. 61 cases have been prosecuted as femicides in our country, and there's been 120 homicides that were women who were the victims. The Secretariat of Human Rights of my country has begun a service for psychological protection and social services for women. Between March and October, there were 41,000 some odd of domestic violence that was gender-based. So, Chair, there has to be further implementation of gender-based policies against discrimination, including a comprehensive organic law to prevent this type of violence. There has to be assessments on a periodic basis of how the laws that are on the books are doing. There has to be coordination with the Secretariat of Human Rights to prevent and provide reparation to victims and survivors of this scourge. This law from 2018 In 2009, 208 transfers of children and were brought to orphanages. There's been campaigns waged at all levels of government to avoid and this has committed the entire nation to become involved in these campaigns. The application of the violet economy has helped to empower women, and this shows that there's a greater presence of women in the workforce, and this helps to break the vicious cycle of violence and contributes to eradicating violence against women. Lastly, I must mention that in November, there were 3 important events, international events, for female candidates, which was organized with the help of SIM and Spain. A webinar also was held under the Ecuadorian Foreign Ministry, which had participation of our Executive Secretary of SIM, Ms. Mora Mora, and other national figures and international figures. And then there was a virtual dialogue about the role of women in the socioeconomic recovery and post-pandemic era. To sum up, despite the crisis, the healthcare crisis, I recognize that we should not stint efforts and mobilize hemispheric cooperation to make this a priority to carry out renewed efforts to combat violence against women, using all international instruments that are available to rid our societies of this scourge that causes and continues to inflict so much harm on our societies. Thank you.
We find a distinguished representative of Ecuador and will now recognize the delegation of
Your microphone is on mute, Ambassador Simas. Great. Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you very much. Greetings to the members of the Council as well. I would like to congratulate the Executive Secretary Alexandra Mora Mora for her presentation today with regard in the context of the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, and congratulate the OAS for the initiatives that support states in this regard and share best practices and experiences in combating violence against women. The day commemorating this International Day, we can't forget to recognize the importance of having the Convention of Belém do Pará available to us as a regional instrument which guides policies, states' policies in this regard. The elimination of all forms of violence and discrimination, violence against women and girls, is a priority to Brazil in the interest of human rights. Brazil has advanced legislation in place to protect and promote the rights of women. The Marieta Peña Law of 2006 was the framework of laws against psychological, physical violence and property violence against women. This law was updated recently to make it more expeditious in taking measures to protect women from family violence. In 2015, there was also the femicide law was approved, which includes crimes with that are gender-based that take place in the country. Madam Chair, the measures of protection aimed at women are becoming more urgently necessary because during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's more urgent to deal with this, but we have a contingency plan for domestic violence against women to combat this, taking focusing on women victims of crimes, the government also launched sensitivity training campaigns about the importance of reporting these incidents and in the social concepts and the role of men as jointly responsible for children as well. In the context of the pandemic, it's only been possible to electronically register the occurrence at the with reports of the police of violence against women throughout the national territory, which because it can't be done in person. People at risk were also, we stepped up the pace of dealing with these cases. Madam Chair, the hotline for support to women, known as League Centro 30, was redesigned to share information on reports, to provide information of assistance and shelter for women and in incidents of violence, and also to help women with regard to their rights. During the pandemic, the virtual assistant provided by the Office of the Public Defender and Ombudsman in all the states throughout were provided throughout the entire country to deal with women who seek help during situations of violence. The budget, there's budget for shelters for women to stay at and receive support. So there was a 200% increase since the beginning of the pandemic with regard to sexual violence. The government created a national registry of persons who have been convicted of rape. The purpose of this was to provide information about the physical characteristics, identification descriptions of these people, and photos of people who have been convicted for such crimes. This registry also has data of the addresses and the record of these people over the last 3 years. We're also aware of that the pandemic places women at greater risk, and that's why the emergency actions have been taken by the government. Particularly with regard to heads of home. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We thank the distinguished delegation of Brazil and now recognize the distinguished delegation of St. Vincent and Grenadines. Ambassador Gilchrist, you have the floor.
Ambassador Gilchrist, could you please request the floor?
Oh, dear me. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Please excuse me for that glitch. Thank you, Chair. I'm honored to take the floor on behalf of the CARICOM group of ambassadors as we commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. 1 in 3 women and girls experiences some form of intimate partner violence during her lifetime. 71% of victims of human trafficking are women and girls, and 3/4 of this group are sexually exploited. While gender-based violence can happen to anyone, some women and girls are more vulnerable. As countries implement lockdown measures, emerging data indicate that domestic violence has intensified in some countries. The United Nations refers to this as the shadow pandemic, growing amidst the COVID-19 crisis. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, health services in many countries have reached capacity, and so too have the domestic violence shelters and helplines. This places women at even greater risk. Chair, the 16 days of activism under this year's theme, Orange the World, Fund, Respond, Prevent, Collect, encourage a collective global effort to address violence against women and girls. Women's groups, civil society, independent human rights institutions, and the OAS all have a role to play in this matter. In this regard, the Caribbean community launched its regional Spotlight initiative this year on September 22nd to help to eliminate violence against women and girls. This is one of the many global actions to bring focus on and seek to address this pressing issue. I quote, "The Spotlight initiative is expected to equip government and civil society to deliver comprehensive data to inform evidence-based planning and policies that would reach both victims and survivors in especially underserved communities. It is hoped that this will also promote gender-sensitive masculinity as a means of ending violence in communities and institutions, while providing feminist movements and women's organizations with skills to advocate for and shape policy. The initiative is aligned with the Caribbean Community's Strategic Plan 2015 to 2019, as it seeks to ensure economic and social resilience in a unified community where all people, especially women and girls, with particular attention to the most vulnerable, can live lives free of violence to not only harness their full potential, but also enjoy the full complement of their human rights. Another initiative worthy of mention is the joint technical webinar organized for December 3rd between the Inter-American Commission of Women, SIM, and the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development, SADE. Chair, violence against women and girls remains largely unreported. 1/3 of women and girls suffers adverse psychological, reproductive, and health consequences from gender-based violence. All of these stymie efforts to achieve women's empowerment and gender equality and must be eradicated through concerted action by all concerned, including government agencies, non-governmental organizations, and community-based organizations. Chair, in spite of the initiatives promoting women's equality in policies and laws and the ascent of women in public life, inherent sociocultural norms and power imbalances still tend to reinforce male domination and to exacerbate the subordination of women. This all results in the reversal of these initiatives and perpetuates violence against women and girls. In consideration of the foregoing, mindful of the need to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment in keeping with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and being strong proponents of the promotion and protection of human rights for all, the CARICOM Group echoes the call to action of the UN Secretary General in the multi-year campaign to address violence against women. Let us unite to end violence against women. Chair, before I close, please allow me, on behalf of the CARICOM Group of Ambassadors, to remind the Permanent Council of the commemoration of another International Day, which also touches and concerns a significant proportion of the world's population, not least among these, women and girls, as well as persons with disabilities. Today, December 2nd, marks the commemoration of the International Day for the Abolition of Slavery. It is the date on which the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the UN Convention for the Suppression of the Traffic in Persons and of the Exploitation of the Prostitution of Others, Resolution 3174 of 2nd December 1949. According to the United Nations, the focus of this day is on eradicating contemporary forms of slavery, such as trafficking in persons, sexual exploitation, the worst forms of child labor, forced marriage, and the forced recruitment of children for use in armed conflicts, end of quote. According to the International Labour Organization, more than 40 million people worldwide are victims of modern slavery. Although modern slavery is not defined in law, it is used as an umbrella term covering practices such as forced labor, debt bondage, forced marriage, and human trafficking. Essentially, it refers to situations of exploitation that a person cannot refuse or leave because of threats, violence, coercion, deception, and/or abuse of power. End of quote. Chair, as we continue to advocate for human rights, democracy, multidimensional security, and integral development, let us redouble our efforts to protect the most vulnerable among us. Thank you, Chair.
We thank you, distinguished representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We now recognize the delegation of
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Let me just recognize the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago. Argentina is next.
Thank you, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you.
It is an honor to deliver statements on behalf of the government and people of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago that advances and promotes the United Nations observance of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women under the theme Orange the World, Fund, Respond, Prevent, Collect. The permanent mission of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago considers it both appropriate and necessary that this organization has once again joined the international community in commemorating this important day, particularly in light of the alarming increase in both reported and unreported incidences of gender-based violence alongside of the measures put in place to curb the spread of the COVID-19 virus. It is even more imperative for us to take concerted action to ensure that this pandemic does not reverse the strides that have been made in eliminating violence against women and in advancing gender equality. As a signatory to the Bellum do Pará Convention and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago remains firmly committed to its international obligations and will continue to place the elimination of violence against women at the top of its national policy and program agenda. One clear demonstration of the continued importance of this issue to the government is the expedition of amendments to the Domestic Violence Act in April of this year to provide enhanced protection to women and children affected by domestic violence and other forms of family violence. Additionally, 2 custom-designed domestic violence shelters were operationalized in May 2020, and it is expected that 3 more of these shelters will be added in the near future. Through the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs Division, the government has intensified its efforts to mainstream gender equality and is escalating the implementation of the policy measures contained in its National Policy on Gender and Development. Recognizing that the pandemic has increased the economic and social vulnerability of women and girls, the government has also placed increased focus on programs to improve the socio-economic standing of women and girls. As part of these efforts, the She Trades Hub was officially launched on October 28, 2020, making Trinidad and Tobago the first Caribbean country to have embarked on the initiative. We are now part of a community of over 25 countries working towards connecting over 3 million women entrepreneurs to global markets by 2021. It is expected that the hub will provide an opportunity for the women who own micro, small, and medium enterprises to expand their businesses through their inclusion into global supply chains and increased business-to-business and business-to-consumer linkages. In closing, Madam Chair, I wish to express my appreciation to you for including this topic on today's agenda and wish to thank Their Excellencies, the ambassadors, for their continued commitment to putting an end to violence against women and girls. As the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago continues its deliberate pursuit of the elimination of every single form of violence against women and girls, I am pleased to convey our government's interest and willingness to work closely with stakeholders, including our fellow member states, permanent observers, and the General Secretariat of the OAS, to fulfill our shared responsibility for achieving gender equality. Thank you, Madam Chair, Excellencies, and distinguished colleagues.
We thank the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago and now recognize the delegation of
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Inasmuch as this is the first time that my delegation is taking the floor, first and foremost, we'd like to deeply thank you and all the delegations who offered their messages of condolences for the passing of Maradona. Secondly, we should also like to thank you for including this very important topic on the agenda of this permanent council. Also, we'd like to thank the Executive Secretariat of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Dr. Alejandra Mora Mora, for her presentation. Violence against women and unequal situations have taken up the attention and have looked at the inexcessive difference in value of the situation. The reality shows us that to be born a boy or a man is valued more than a woman. And this is what we have to break. So in this regard, we underscore that the government of Alberto Fernandez government has decidedly declared and put together a policy for gender equality through the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity. This is the first in the history of Argentina. This underscores a deep-seated commitment to build a more equal society that promotes full-fledged autonomy of everyone and without any hierarchies based on gender differences or gender. To grapple with the structural problem of the violence, the government of Argentina launched a national plan of action against gender-based violence 2020-2022. And it's characterized by being cross-cutting, federal, and intersectional. And its ultimate aim is to build a more fair, egalitarian society without violence against women and LGBTI people. The existence of institutions for women and gender is the highest in terms of the levels of the state and involves all levels of power in the commitment to move ahead and implement public policies for preventing and eradicating all forms of violence based on changes in the structural paradigms that violence inheres. Nonetheless, we have to be mindful of the fact that eradication of violence against women and children is not something that can be done in isolation. And we feel that it's crucial to build national and international consensuses so that we can zoom in with our efforts in this common initiative based on sustainable development goals by 2030. In addition to being part of the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women and the attendant protocols, Argentina ratified the Inter-American Convention to prevent, punish, and eradicate violence against women by periodically participating in the evaluation that the Committee of Experts of the follow-up mechanism of this convention carries out, and that is SECV. We have attended and been part of the discussions carried out by SIM, and we also actively participate in the ministers and high authorities for women in Mercosur and their meetings. And then finally, bearing in mind the context of COVID-19 and the pandemic, generally speaking, the grave incidence of gender inequality in all spheres of people became evident and takes on importance, particularly when we're talking about general measures against violence, which have been adopted within the framework of social isolation. These measures not only aim to strengthen networks for all-encompassing protection, but also look at universities and other unions that provide housing for people in these extreme situations. And they decided to concentrate on improving things for most vulnerable populations. The feminization of poverty, of course, also has an impact in the life of women. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and good afternoon.
We thank the delegation of Argentina and now recognize the delegation of Chile.
Madam Chairman, the 25th of November, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, in the hands of members of this organization, we have been invited to be mindful of the efforts to eradicate violence. This year, 2020, has been tremendously challenging, there's no shadow of a doubt, for all of our countries, particularly for the institutions that shoulder the responsibility of responding to violence against women, the demand of which has increased significantly. In the case of Chile, during the lockdown months caused by COVID-19, the appeal to some guidance when it comes to violence increased tremendously. But the crises always lead to opportunities. They generate opportunities, and that's why today we look at some of the main features of the contingency plans in Chile, in the Ministry of Women's Affairs, undergirded by innovation with responses. There are now tools to go to survivor women. It has also helped us to forge alliances with civil society organizations in the private sector, sending a very strong message to combat violence against women, which is a task for the entire society. The first component of our contingency plan is to ensure that efforts continue and strengthen our capacity to respond. Our first concern was to guarantee and ensure that the 109 centers for women and the 45 cases of help for women in cases of violence in Chile were working full steam so that we could satisfy the increasing demands of our society through our assistance. We increased financial resources. We invested in sectors so that we could have remote assistance and shore up our capacities. Another key factor was the need to boost coordination mechanisms with all the stakeholders involved in this circuit that addressed violence. And this is, for example, all services related to the response to violence and gender. They were taken into account this year. And it ensured that the precautionary measures would automatically be extended across the board. And it worked hand in hand with the police and the community to send off the message that we would look for help against violence and punishment for those who perpetrated anything during the quarantine or the lockdown. And we did all of this with a view to ensure participation of various stakeholders in the fight against gender violence. And we called a group of parliamentarians, representative of civil society, parliamentarians, who made up a committee for COVID. They had specific work to broach the impact and provide protection and economic empowerment as well. The efforts to broach violence as a part of public health, we wanted to guarantee that information through all of the channels for help would also be included in the daily health reports on COVID transmitted or broadcast on TV. And as such, we innovated what we did as a response with these challenges. New channels of communication were set up, a WhatsApp line, and other kinds of telephone lines. The ministry had online services, hotlines. So, as such, now we're working with the World Bank to flesh out a sole platform that has all of the information, the relevant data concerning women who have been victims. This is done with a view to getting justice. And in addition to this, a new platform called Cidadesca was set up, which seeks to raise awareness of violence against women. And we want to train society in a cross-sectional way to deal with the various ways that violence can be expressed and look at measures for prevention within communities. And now, concluding, I would like to underscore that the pandemic has given us a new way to understand crises and their impacts on women, confirming our idea that it is imperative for women to be at the center of all strategies in any response for recovery. We have raised our awareness collectively. Nonetheless, the key is that we have to transform these things into experiences that will enable people to be prepared to look at this from a gender perspective and deal with the emergencies at hand. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
We thank the distinguished representative of Chile and now recognize the delegation of Nicaragua.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. The delegate of the government of Nicaragua would like to thank the Secretariat for the inclusion of this topic as we commemorate the International Day against Violence Against Women on the agenda. And thank you, Madam Chairman, for having put this item on the agenda of our Permanent Council meeting. We really like to greet the Assistant Secretary General right now and the esteemed delegates and the permanent representatives, the alternates as well as the distinguished permanent observers and anyone here. This commemoration allows us to have an exchange of good practices on the programs and gives us a chance to identify the existent challenges such as exclusion, inequality, economic inequality, salary differences, social, cultural, and mistreatment as we fight against the scourge of domestic violence, femicide, intolerance against women and girls, the situation of which regionally and internationally continues to be very precarious, particularly when we speak about Afro-descendant and indigenous populations. Similarly, it's very important to underscore the progress that has been made by women in each and every country of the region and to take note of the good practices that we've had. The COVID-19 pandemic has deepened domestic violence and has underscored the key role that women have in frontline workers or as frontline workers. They continue to be helpers on the front line. Women are the first to respond when crises arise. We have to look at remuneration of women, particularly for those who work in public and private health, as well as the fragility in some cases of the capacity that we have to provide health, universal health coverage for all populations. And everything indicates the importance of putting women at the center front of public policies and to have major investment made in women with a view to having more equitable, inclusive societies in the name of peace and progress of our nations. Domestic violence, access to financing, the digital technological divide, it continues to be one of the challenges that has been put up by our states. Nicaragua is a sovereign state that works and promotes to have peace and reconciliation and tolerance amongst Nicaraguan families, and moves with reconciliation under the aegis of Daniel Ortega Saavedra, our president and vice president of the Republic, Rosario Murillo. Both have worked tirelessly with great progress to protect and promote rights of women throughout the nation. They have public policies aimed to eradicate violence against women in keeping with what is established in our national law as the international laws that protect women and the Belém de Pará Convention. We have a constitutional framework that through integral law against violence against women and the reform of 641 in the criminal code, we have mechanisms that denounce these acts of violence against women. In terms of good practices, the National Police, since 2017, has special women's offices in all of the departments in the country. For 2014, we already had different systems of communication. We've had commissariats that look after women's affairs and the implementation of laws that punish perpetrators and harassment, be it physical or otherwise, amongst people at home, and looks at this problem in a very all-encompassing way. As far as concerned prevention against violence, the National Police has implemented strategies in the community, the aim of which is to have family peaceful situations that can confront their problems. And they work with legal medical centers and people so as to offer better attention and care for women, children, both boys and girls, for all Nicaraguan families. Here we're talking about eliminating the gap and inequality between women and men, and to have this throughout the entire country so that we have a new citizens culture, a culture of dialogue that strengthens family relations. We have a gender policy that establishes equality between women and men, law 50/50 that establishes gender equality, as well as putting forth candidates for high positions. Women's equality is human rights, we believe, that can strengthen harmony and peaceful coexistence as we build a more fair, equitable society and contributes to the development, both economic and cultural, in the country, to preserve respect of the environment and natural resources by using technology and techniques that are in harmony with Mother Earth. In the Economic Forum, in the report, it underscores that Nicaragua has a position and is sixth in terms of equity throughout the world. And we are one of the best countries in the hemisphere, and we're fifth as far as participation of women in the parliament, and first in regard to women in ministerial positions. And thus this evinces the effectiveness of our public policies implemented by the government of reconciliation and unity. The position of women in public offices is represented by 59.7% of positions in the judiciary, 45.7 in the parliament, 46%, and 30% in mayorships. And similarly, women hold some of the most important positions in the state and the government: Vice President of the Republic, the Chair of the Supreme Court of Justice, the Vice President of the National Assembly, the General Ministry, and the Ministry of Defense, the Minister for Human Rights, the Mayorship, the Tourism Ministry, the Ministry of Women, in addition to other high positions in which women are placed. With regards to the executive branch, nine of the ministries, that is to say 26.6%, are headed up by women, where we add 7 vice ministers for 43.8% altogether. So 14 of the 31 in the central areas have women as their leaders. In addition to other branches on the state, women occupy 57.14% in the National Assembly, 40% of the magistrates in the Electoral Supreme Council, 31.25% of the magistrates in the Supreme Court, they are justices, and 50% of the general controllerships, as well as others who work in the bank, in the central bank. Madam Chairman, despite natural disasters and other damage that has been caused, the COVID-19 pandemic and the other course of measures against our countries, we continue to make progress with the helping hand of God to strengthen and make progress in the economic, social, and cultural arenas, which has contributed significantly to slashing the economic gender gap. And with regards to access to science and technology and energy, all of this with policies that redistribute economic well-being for women. And as was expressed by the Vice President of the Republic, Mrs. Murillo, on the 26th of November this year, today, Nicaraguan women are victorious, and particularly, especially, they have fought against hate in all due respect, underscoring that we want a light life for our Nicaragua. In the midst of all the dread in which we live, we would like to live in peace. We would want respect. We want full-fledged recognition of our couples, of our families, of our communities, and of our rights for all women. As such, we want to be a state that promotes women's rights so that they can be positioned and have a role in all areas. Now we have to work arduously so that this recognition and this respect comes from within the family, from the home, with all of our communities, our companions, so that we can be stronger and we can recognize the entire society and underscore our rights. No more hate. And we always say that violence is, or humiliates humanity and all mankind in all of its forms when it comes to violence against women. We say that we want to live in peace. We want to live in peace, and thus we decry violence, and particularly all forms and violence that strips women of their life and offends everyone. It's an offense for all of mankind. That is what violence is. Respect for unity and rights with peaceful coexistence flies in the face of peace. No more hate, no more terrorism, no more violence, no any kind of hate against women. Young women, mothers, all women, in all work situations, all social arenas, call for respect of their rights and equity that we have gotten as they are in positions of power, be it in the family, in couples, in the community. And we say that we don't ever want to have and go back to the terrible forms of violence that we've known. We condemn violence, we condemn hate. We want to move ahead with victory and light. And we want to continue to live with the full-fledged rights of our women and dignity. That's what the Vice President of the Republic said. Nicaragua will continue to sketch glorious pages of the history of our country with a decisive role that spearheads leadership to deal with the pandemic and all of the challenges that we grapple with as a nation. We will participate in all the decisions that move towards peace, reconciliation, harmony, and the development of the nation. We will continue to make progress firmly, steadfastly in the rights of women by strengthening their legal, political, and social position, as well as their cultural and economic position. We will continue to spearhead the right to live in peace with dignity, free of violence, broadening their main role in Nicaraguan society. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
We thank the distinguished delegate of Nicaragua and now recognize the delegation of Peru.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's no sound coming in the booth. The English booth apologizes. Now once again, there's no audio. There's the booth apologizes. Yes. It must be maybe because of the video. Now with audio alone, it's better. Yes. Fine. Thank you. I'll begin again. As I was saying, violence against women is many causes and affects all the countries of the region. It was worsened by COVID-19. New data has showed that all types of violence against women have been intensified in girls, especially domestic violence. Our societies are experiencing a progressive awareness raising with regard to how serious this situation is and the need to change the cultural patterns that are behind this, and to a great extent generated and reproduced. This has allowed us to raise the profile of this phenomena and allow us to more decisively confront it. The countries of the hemisphere, we have to join efforts so that citizens, the interpreter apologizes, so we commit to continue to strengthen the mechanisms to address the situation, to finish, to wrap up the Peru would like to commend the Inter-American Commission of Women and Mesecvi's efforts, the invaluable efforts, and hail them and we will continue to support these efforts. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.
Apologies. I thank the delegation of Peru and now recognize the delegation of Honduras.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Firstly, we would like to express our gratitude to the Inter-American Commission of Women for requesting adding this important topic to the order of business. Honduras joins in the commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and reiterates its firm commitment of the state of Honduras to prevent, eradicate, and punish any form of violence against women, whether in line with the Declaration of the against Violence Against Women approved by the General Assembly of the UN in 1993, and through the Inter-American Convention to punish and sanction and prevent violence against women approved by the General Assembly of this organization in 1994. This year, in confronting the emergency arising from COVID-19, as well as the natural disasters that recently hit our region, which has caused specific impacts on women and have made existing inequalities more apparent and deepened them. We've identified that there's the heavy load on women's backs of raising kids and doing housework, and this has made women, along with many other duties, this has all fell on women. In Honduras, the National Emergency System and other agencies, therefore, have taken several measures to prevent, assist, and deal with and punish violence against women. The government of President Juan Orlando Hernandez promotes the fundamental rights of women, especially those who have undergone any form of violence. There's been efforts stepped up in the President's program, Ciudad Mujer, to promote respect for women and to improve the living conditions of all women who have suffered any type of violence, exclusion, or vulnerability. Likewise, the program Ciudad Mujer is a relevant instrument to aid in fulfilling the goals that the state has set for itself for the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal achievement. This is focused on improving equality to respond to the needs of women. Truly, we reiterate the commitment of Honduras to continue with taking comprehensive measures to prevent and eliminate any type of violence and discrimination against women. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Madam Chair, you're on
We
mute.
thank the distinguished delegation of Honduras and now recognize the delegation of Guatemala.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My delegation thanks you for inviting us to this regular session of the Permanent Council at the request of SIM's Executive Secretary to commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Likewise, it thanks the Executive Secretary Alejandra Mora Mora for her presence and applauds this council in the 16-day campaign to eradicate violence against women and girls. Guatemala reaffirms its commitment in developing politics to eradicate all forms of violence and discrimination against women, girls, and teenage girls. We take advantage of this opportunity to underscore that women are part of one of the most vulnerable groups that are most affected by the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. Many women are on the front lines of medical response, and many of them have been victims of intrafamily violence during the pandemic. In this regard, we underscore the importance of incorporating among the responses to COVID-19 protection, promotion of women's human rights and girls' rights among the priority policies of states. Madam Chair, in Guatemala, there are high rates of violence against women. That's why my country recognizes it's an issue that affects their women's development, safety, and health. In 2018, with with a promotion of a law against femicide and other forms of violence against women in Decree 22, 2018. Guatemala prioritized addressing the different forms of violence that target women because of their condition, that are of a psychological, physical, and social nature, and its maximum expression is femicide, of course, of these crimes. And the legislation in legislators have passed laws that have helped women who have suffered violence of all types. So, for example, the immediate search of missing women law and the law of the genetic database for forensic use. These laws and the existing laws that were on the books all help for this purpose. As of 2018, in my country, we began the process of updating the National Prevention Plan and Eradication of Intrafamily Violence and Violence Against Women, NOVI, for 2019 to 2028. The design of the Plan NOVI is coordinated by an official, and it's technically run by the Secretariat of Women. In this framework, we created a process of consultation nationally and in each department to raise the areas that should be addressed in this plan. Also, we developed a response and a strategy for social protection for women and girls who are victims and survivors of violence, and developing interventions to set the foundation for social protection network of children and girls and women in line with international standards on the subject now and the national priorities. Madam Chair, for the purpose of reinforcing the measures to provide greater access of women to justice in 2014 to 2019, we increased the number of courts and appeals courts and trial courts. Currently, there's a coverage of 59% nationally in 13 departments where there's been 36,000 some odd cases have been heard, and more than 11,000 judgments have been issued, and we've improved the quality of registries and statistic generation by police and the courts with regard to violence against women. As for survivors assistance services, the country has 10 support services for women survivors of violence, which are in Guatemala City and 8 departments of the city, which are administered by civil society organization with financial aid from the Ministry of Government. Also, the enforcement of the conventions, the chair, the Women's Agency is in charge of this and created a guidebook to address workplace harassment and sexual harassment in the workplace. So in this regard, over this year, there was the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forests, etc., have helped to put together protocols, internal protocols, to put an end to harassment. To conclude, Guatemala reiterates its commitment to eliminate violence against women. No backsliding is admissible after achieving the rights that we have. Now we believe we have to build stronger institutions to prevent and eradicate violence against women and girls. Not one more woman or girl. End to the violence against women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. We thank the distinguished representative of Guatemala and now recognize the delegation of Panama.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair. This November 25th is different from all other ones, as the Executive Secretary Alejandra Mora Mora mentioned in her remarks. This is a November 25th, in which we commemorate while we continue to face the pandemic, which has gotten worse and exacerbated all the bad things that have happened in violence against women for the simple reason, mere reason of being women. It's become very obvious, and it's a brutal form of violation of the women, of the human rights of the half of the population. There should be a special session of the Permanent Council about this, but in honor of this time that you provided to us, my delegation would like to underscore three points. First, recognize the Inter-American Commission of Women's efforts and its work with MESECVI to prevent and eradicate violence, and the contribution to stopping violence against women in the context of COVID-2, that the progress we've achieved in this area, prevention and elimination of violence against women and girls in all of its forms, is at risk. If in 2019 it was eminent to redouble efforts in all areas to save lives, in the current outlook, it's more so. In this vein, I'd like to take advantage of this opportunity to recognize and put here on the table for everyone the need to incorporate in the fight against gender-based violence, which is deconstructing toxic manhood and masculinity. This is a fight in the behalf of democracy that the other half of the population should be engaged in. I'd like to call on everyone, men and women, to engage in this. Panama shares that this past 25th of November, we enacted a law which took measures to punish and eradicate and prevent violence against women, and reiterating the commitment of the national government. To wrap up, I would like to remind especially Linda Poole, who has devoted herself to stop and prevent violence against women. She promoted the adoption of the Convention of Belém do Pará, the most important international instrument in our region. This shows our commitment, and we will continue with this commitment. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We thank the delegation of Panama. I now recognize the delegation of Colombia.
Ambassador Ordóñez, if you could request the floor. Thank you, Madam Chair. In an event headed by the President of Colombia, Iván Duque, or chaired by him, we commemorated this past November 25th, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. To achieve that my country be a guarantor of equity and fairness is the purpose laid out by the Vice President Marta Lucía Ramírez during the event of commemoration of this International Day. There, she urged all stakeholders and actors in society to fight tirelessly against violence that is gender-based. Likewise, she emphasized that this determination to put an end to violence against women must be applied as well to all sectors of the population, in all settings and spheres, at all times, and cannot just be on the occasion of a day of commemoration. In Colombia, we have been engaged in a systematic effort from the very beginning of this government. We showed our determination to reach equity. Since we put together the National Development Plan and put it down on paper, it is obvious we want to put an end to all types of violence against women and also guarantee the promotion and development and of women in all areas of leadership in society. Equity is materializing, and this has been possible because the national government, from the day one, set an example in the persona of the person who the president himself, who created who created parity in his representation in his cabinet and in the development plan. Equal number of men and women. Even though there has been a lower number of feminicides, there's still very high figures. The COVID-19 pandemic also unleashed the phenomena of violence, and the victims have been women. The government is moving forward initiatives and has been innovative in addressing the issue, but there's still a long way to go to move forward. The results are insufficient. There will not be successful policies if we don't strengthen the family as the core unit of society and deal with the cultural and social factors that lead to violence as well as inequality. In the context of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, the government launched a national movement that seeks for all people in Colombia overcome these types of conduct that go against women and against the policy of favoring women in the country. Thank you very much, Chair.
We thank the distinguished representative of Colombia and now recognize the delegation of Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The delegation of Colombia is grateful on the occasion of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and at this meeting, as well as the presentation of the Executive Secretariat of SEAM. For years, we have fought to try to ensure recognition of the human rights of women in all its dimensions. Nonetheless, over the last few months, despite the progress in gender equality and empowerment of women and greater participation in decision-making in politics, and in eradication of violence against them, among other things, despite this, not only has it become stagnant, but there has been backsliding. The 25th of November should be a day to show progress in this regard of eradicating violence against women and girls. However, the stepping up of physical and psychological violence against women has been one of the worst consequences of this pandemic, as recently the publication of the Inter-American Commission of Women has announced. The ICHR has monitored this throughout the country. Higher rates of feminicides and intrafamily violence against women and sexual violence against children and girls, violence in public spaces, including rapes, digital violence that is gender-based. In view of the lack of data, there's an underreporting of the gender-based violence that takes place, as well as stigmatization and re-victimization of the victims. It continues to be urgent and necessary, Madam Chair, that the measures that are taken during COVID go hand in hand with protection measures for women and girls, specifically strengthening mechanisms of reporting and access to justice. Costa Rica has reported in the past in different forms about the measures it's taken nationally in this regard. If the Americas has been a pioneer in the world, approving more than 20 years ago the first specific convention to confront violence against women, the Convention of Belém do Pará, of course. In the current crisis, it's our job to also pick up this banner. We should eradicate violence in this pandemic. Today, more than ever, we must stop the spreading of this scourge. We must break this perverse cycle of violence against women and girls. Only in this way we'll be able to speak of equity, justice, and security. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We thank the delegation of Costa Rica and now recognize the delegation of Venezuela.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, firstly, I would like to congratulate Ms. Alejandra Mora, the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, for her clear presentation. I have listened closely to the comments of the delegate who just spoke before me, and the measures it's taken by its government to prevent and eliminate violence against women, and also this in the context of COVID-19. In the case of my country, I can't say the same thing. On a daily basis, we can see this situation, far from being under control, gets worse. Since day one of the pandemic, we've seen an increase, no question, of gender-based violence, and particularly against women who are in a situation of poverty and are not in view. They're a target for irreparable violence because the government does nothing. Since 2016, once the unprecedented humanitarian crisis began, and the only one responsible is the regime of Nicolas Maduro, this has widened the gender gap and has made women extremely vulnerable, and and they are now subject more to all forms of violence. There's no access to the most elementary, most basic medicine and medical care either. As a result, there's cancer treatment, contraception, there's nothing. The state has the obligation to guarantee the right of health to everyone. 6 million migrants. It's a migration crisis as well, and women are mistreated as well. And unsafe abortions and transactional sex in exchange for food. These are the things that have come about as a result. Lastly, I can't fail to mention the efforts of the National Assembly of Venezuela, presided by Juan Guaido, in approving the agreements to raise the profile and promote and shed light on the campaign to eliminate violence against Venezuelan women inside and outside the country, and talks about the existence of a differentiated treatment between poor women and non-poor women. And there's a higher burden on poor women to obtain food. Lastly, the delegation of Venezuela says that it will continue. We work closely with the Inter-American Commission of Women to try to find common joint solutions to lessen the inequities that exist. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We thank the distinguished representative of Venezuela, and we'll now recognize the permanent mission of France, the permanent observer mission of France.
Madam Chairman, Assistant Secretary General, during this day, as we commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, France would like to reaffirm its commitment and its determination to fight and to eliminate all forms of violence with regards to women and girls. First, I'd like to thank the Inter-American Commission of Women for this point today, and Mrs. Mora for her presentation this morning. a very comprehensive presentation. In spite of all the efforts made, women and girls in the entire world are mistreated and exposed. As has already been said, there is physical violence that assails women throughout the world. This COVID-19 has dramatically increased this, and violence against women and children, or I should say girl, particularly domestic violence. And this is an alarming crisis as we look at this in the Americas and in many states in Europe. Efforts have been mobilized. Our progress is ambitious when it comes to women, and we've worked considerably. We have worked towards and advocated programs for women, particularly now in all international institutions. This is a priority so that we can improve things for women. We work towards universalization of the Istanbul Convention and the Council of Europe, which is directly inspired by the Inter-American Convention of Belém do Pará. This is a wonderful example for women on this topic, and it is recognized in the Americas as well as abroad. France looks at equality of women, and this is our continuous work to increase this by 2022. France will continue its commitment against all forms of violence against women. And for 2021, we have a forum co-presided by Mexico. According to international rights for women, there will be activities against violence. For the Council of Rights of Women, for 2023, we want to actively promote rights of women and girls as well as their protection. Madam Chairman, this persistent violence against women is deepening, and it's worsened since COVID-19. The vaccines that are being prepared in the laboratories and the behavior that we see needs the commitment by everyone, men and women alike. The International Convention, the adoption of laws is very important. Information based on respect, particularly for women and girls. This is crucial. It's a question of mankind's rights, human rights. Thank you very much.
We thank the distinguished representative of France and will now recognize the Permanent Observer Mission of Spain.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, asks the speaker. Very well then, thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'd like to thank the Executive Secretary of SIM, Mrs. Mora Mora, for placing this item on today's agenda with a view to having this permanent council be an opportunity to remember, to commemorate all of the victims, and also to express my condolences to those families who are involved, and also to condemn those perpetrators of mistreatment. We want a free society, one free of violence. We have a firm commitment against violence, and in 2004, we approved the pioneering law against gender violence, a law that serves as a model for many others. Also, in the OAS and amongst member states, the elimination of violence against women and girls is a priority in the Spanish foreign policy. Spain promotes bilateral cooperation in this arena through agreements and cooperation as regards cooperation policies for development and in humanitarian actions. The strategy also has a host of different kinds of cooperation with Spain's cooperation agency and includes, amongst its priorities, eradication of violence against women and girls. We share with the OAS and member states that we have to bear in mind decrying all kinds of violence, gender violence, femicides, mistreatment, sexual exploitation, abuse, pornography, harassment, sexual attacks, forced marriages, and anything that flies in the face of reproductive rights, and many other things. There are many ways that the violence manifests itself. Furthermore, we should have on the agenda an end impunity so that we can lead towards a measure of recovery and not fly in the face of rights so that women feel safe in societies. And lastly, I would like to put on the record our recognition for all of the tireless work SIM does, particularly its secretariat, to promote a change in the culture that breaks with time-worn stereotypes imposed on women and on which violence is based. We continue to support the work and will work hand in hand, particularly in the face of the pandemic. And as has been said this afternoon, this has empowered violence against women. The response is less violence. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, you're on mute. Sorry.
We thank the distinguished representative of Spain and now recognize the permanent mission of Italy, the permanent observer mission of Italy.
Signora Presidente.
Madam Chairman of the Permanent Council, Assistant Secretary General Mr. Mendes, ambassadors, with regards to human rights, let me say that this is one of the most important priorities in our foreign policy. Human rights contributes to peace and the prevention of conflicts, and is part of democratic societies. It's against violence. We work against violence against women. We move towards development, equality, and peace. Italy would like to thank the OAS and thank SIM for upholding their strong international work on this very important topic and for all of their specific initiatives to analyze violence against women. Italy is fully committed to fight against gender violence, to promote equality, and to promote this value as one of its pillars. And therefore, we hope to continue to work on these crucial topics in cooperation hand in hand with the OAS. And then I should also like to underscore our deep-seated commitment in favor of persons with disabilities and also in favor of rights for all people as we remember and commemorate different groups. Thank you.
Representative of Italy, and now recognize the delegation of the Holy See.
Madam Chairman, my delegation is very happy to represent the Holy See as we commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And we truly appreciate the work done by the Inter-American Commission of Women in favor of women's dignity in the hemisphere. A few days ago, Pope Francis said, all too often women are offended, abused, violated, and taken into prostitution. We want a better world, one based on peace and not based on war. For that, we have to do so much more for the dignity of every woman. Madam Chairman, we with this item on the agenda, I'd like to also express at this time our solidarity as we commemorate persons with disabilities as well. For the Holy See, we recognize each person with disabilities, and this is our recognition of unique contribution for the common good. And we celebrate the efforts to move forward those public policies that promote this point, particularly during this pandemic of COVID-19. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
For your intervention. And I want to thank all delegations that have taken the floor to address the issue of International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. We want to thank the Executive Secretary, Alejandro Mora, who requested the inclusion of this important topic on the order of business for this meeting. Thank you all. We now turn to item 7, the next item on the agenda, which is the commemoration of the International Transgender Day of Remembrance. In response to the request contained in document CP/INF 8812/20 from the Permanent Mission of Brazil as coordinator of the OAS LGBTI core group. In this regard, I am pleased to offer the floor to the delegation of Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I truly appreciate this item being placed on our regular meeting of the Permanent Council today as we commemorate the International Transgender Day of Remembrance, which was on the 20th of November. As the coordinator of the OAS, the LGBTI core group, the delegation of Brazil will have a joint declaration that refers to that date. And I'm going to read this in Spanish. The initiatives of the core group in the OAS include Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Mexico, and Uruguay. We commemorate the International Transgender Day of Remembrance. Since 1991, which is always celebrated on the 20th of November with a view to remember trans people who have been subject to acts of violence. The Inter-American Mission of Human Rights has underscored that trans people have historically lived through discrimination and exclusion because of their sexual orientation, their identity, and their gender expressions. And they continue to be subject to acts of violence, harassment, and other acts. Exclusion and violence because of prejudice is what is meted out to trans people. It ends up in poverty, in addition to other opportunities that are not there. The OAS LGBTI core group reiterates human rights that are universal, indivisible, and cross-cultural. They are cross-cutting, and they point to the equality of all people, which is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the American Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Inter-American Convention of Human Rights. Today, we reaffirm that trans people have the right to recognition, enjoyment, and the exercise as well as production of equality for all of their human rights and their fundamental universal rights. As was underscored by others in the human rights system, recognition of gender identity is of utmost importance for full enjoyment of human rights for trans people. and it calls for protection against discrimination. The governments and societies have to ensure full-fledged enjoyment of human rights for all people without any distinction whatsoever. Our region promotes the protection of human rights of LGBTI people. Nonetheless, there are still a lot of challenges in terms of raising awareness and eradication of hate, prejudice against trans people. Member states of the LGBTI core group align ourselves with international organizations as well as others so that states move towards adopting the necessary measures to end discrimination, violence, and exclusion against trans people, and as such promote full-fledged enjoyment of rights. This is for the commemoration of the International Transgender Day of Remembrance, 20th of November. The core group promoted a virtual seminar to promote economic strengthening and viability of trans people. This was done with a view to exchange and share best practices in the public and private arena as related to promoting and respecting rights of all trans people in their workplace and elsewhere. Included in the webinar, we have this on Facebook in the Department of Social Inclusion and the Secretariat for Access to Equity. End of quote. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thanks to everybody, and I appreciate the core group.
Distinguished Representative of Brazil, Ambassador Fernando Simas, for his presentation. And there be no further requests for the floor, I suggest that the Permanent Council take note of the joint statement of the member countries of the OAS LGBTI core group as read by the distinguished delegation of Brazil as coordinator of the core group. There be no objections, it is so agreed. Our next item is a farewell to our colleague, Lorena Sol de Paul, permanent representative of El Salvador. Ambassador Sol de Paul presented her letters of credentials to the Secretary General on December 16, 2019. During her tenure as permanent representative of El Salvador to the Organization of American States, Ambassador Sol de Paul, a recognized expert in financial and administrative matters, offered her invaluable support to the work of the Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Affairs. Ambassador Sol de Paul had a long-standing diplomatic career in the service of her country before coming to the OAS, including tours as Consul General of El Salvador to New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, Massachusetts. In 2009, she served as permanent delegate ambassador of El Salvador to UNESCO in Paris. She has several positions related to the formulation of Sustainable Development Goal 4 on education. Her expertise led her to lead the voting scrutiny of the Executive Board of the UNESCO General Conferences in 2013 and 2015. In 2015, she was elected as President of the Finance and Administrative Commission of the Executive Board of UNESCO. My dear Ambassador Sol de Paul, this council has benefited enormously from your expertise and knowledge. I now offer the floor to the coordinators of the regional groups to salute you. The floor, we recognize and open the floor to Ambassador Luis Alvarado of Nicaragua.
On behalf of SICA, we'd like to offer a well-deserved recognition of the outstanding work carried out by Ambassador Soldepool in this organization. Mrs. Soldepool, as a representative of her country in this organization, has allowed everyone to benefit from her knowledge of the budget and her expertise in administration, and particularly because of the crisis the OAS is going through. We've also had Ambassador Soldepool, and we've been able to enjoy her amiability, her conviviality. For Ambassador Soldepool, we'd like to read a bit of a poem from a Nicaraguan universal poet, Ruben Darío, and it states the following: the princess is sad. The princess, with the breath that leaves her mouth and that have lost its warmth. The princess is pale, but she's a rose. She wants to be a butterfly that flies, a flower with a ray of sunshine that gets lost in the wind of beauty. Ambassador Soldepool, on behalf of SICA, we wish you the best of success in your future, and we're quite sure that we'll see you again. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
For his intervention, and now recognize the distinguished representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the CARICOM group of ambassadors, I say farewell to Ambassador Maria Lorena Soldepool as she takes leave of the Organization of American States. Ambassador Soldepool came to the OAS in December 2019 at a time when we enjoyed a freedom of moving and meeting, which no one suspected was soon to be modified into this virtual modality, which hampers the establishment of enduring bonds of friendship and fraternity. Ambassador, we recall the pledge which you made during the presentation of your credentials to work with the member states for a hemisphere of peace, democracy, and development. We have no doubt that during your tenure here, you sought to promote the ideals of those three important elements of our lives, especially as you came with a wealth of experience in the global arena. Ambassador, the CARICOM Group therefore expresses its acknowledgement of and appreciation for your work at this organization. Farewell, Ambassador. Please accept our best wishes for success and fulfillment in your future undertakings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We find a distinguished representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and now recognize the delegation of the USA.
Madam Chair, United States delegation.
Mr. Freedom, we cannot hear you.
Okay. Let's see, can you hear me now?
This is better.
If you can.
Let me give it a try. The U.S. delegation would like to bid farewell to Ambassador Soldepool and express our sincere appreciation for the service she has rendered to this organization. We would especially like to acknowledge her contributions to the CAP, where she began participating immediately upon her arrival and has served as second vice chair during 2020. In a period of unprecedented health and financial challenges for our region, Ambassador Soldepool never wavered. The committee could always count on her to address head-on the most pressing issues, offering constructive comments and considerations, and doing her best to drive the CAP toward agreement. It was clear to all how much she not only enjoyed this set of issues, but also how dedicated she was to the present and future financial well-being of the OAS. The committee and this organization as a whole are better off thanks to your contributions, Ambassador. And I know Ambassador Trujillo feels fortunate to have worked with you on the CAP and appreciates your dedication as Vice Chair. We wish you the best of luck going forward. Thank you very much.
We thank the distinguished delegation of the United States and now recognize the delegation of Canada.
Madam Chair, it's always a bit of a bittersweet moment, I know, when it's time for us to say farewell to our colleagues and friends. I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity today, though, to say a couple of words of farewell to Ambassador Lorena Soldepool, who came to us as an experienced diplomat with a lot of experience in UNESCO, including on the Finance and Administration Committee, chairing that body. An experience that she put to work immediately upon arriving here. And as my American colleague, I think, described quite well, she made a significant contribution to the work of the CAP over the course of her time here. And let me echo the words that were just said about the importance of that contribution and how much it meant not only to my delegation, but how much it meant to all of us. That work is sometimes a little bit under the radar, and it's really important because it makes a significant difference in us collectively being able to meet the commitments that we have undertaken in the organization. So we thank you for that contribution, and this is also an opportunity for me to say a couple of words about Canada's relationship with El Salvador. We have very strong people-to-people relations with El Salvador. In fact, the largest Latin American diaspora in Canada is of El Salvadorian origin. And it's a testament to that, the fact that Canada and El Salvador, our two governments, work so closely hand in hand on humanitarian flights, repatriating citizens from both of our countries on occasions during the pandemic. That spirit of collaboration came through in your personal contributions, Ambassador, to the work of this organization. And we could see that in what you brought daily to our efforts. And so on behalf of my delegation and on behalf of myself, let me simply wish you a fond farewell, wish you the best of luck in all that lies ahead. And thank you once again for everything that you've done while you've been here. Merci. Gracias.
We thank the distinguished representative of Canada for his intervention and now recognize the delegation of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The delegation of Mexico bids farewell with much affection to Ms. Soldepool, an accomplished diplomat from El Salvador, who has played a leading role in this permanent council. So her performance showed her facility and her commitment to to multilateralism and promoting the goals of the organization. And she shows the value of women in high-level positions for women, and all of her humanistic and professional characteristics, her desire to move toward peace through multilateralism and inclusive dialogue as a powerful instrument of negotiation. Mexico wishes her success in her upcoming responsibilities. We would have liked to have spent more time with you, but your great capacity and demand for you in other latitudes where you will continue to promote the principles and values of a committed public servant to multilateralism and peace. Hope to see you soon, Lorena. Our delegation is grateful to you for your professionalism and your incomparable ability to deal with people so pleasantly. Thank you.
We thank the distinguished representative of Mexico I now recognize the delegation of Panama.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With the permission of our regional coordinator, and the delegation of Panama would like to bid farewell with a few words to Ambassador Sol de Paul during this period. So, with a transparent and frank dialogue that built consensus, and your invaluable expertise and your solid professional credentials and your support and leadership was key at the OAS to achieve gender equality in the region, in the organization of the region. At the same time, we came almost at the same time to this House of the Americas, but plans changed for all of us, and we have to accept these plans optimistically. Dear Ambassador Sol de Paul, you are, all women are your relatives, and many women from my generation have you have the doors of Panama open to you. It's easier to just say see you later, hoping that you can continue to achieve in your new life, and we hope to be able to meet with you again, to be able to share the a joy that you bring. Thank you. Good luck. Success.
We thank the delegation of Panama and now recognize the delegation of Colombia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of Aladi, I would like to express our feelings of sadness for the departure of Ambassador Sol de Paul. You placed yourselves at the service of the inter-American system. You placed your experience, your judgment, your tradition as a diplomat. There's no question that you enriched with your experience the multilateral dialogue we engaged in here. We are going to miss you, Madam Ambassador. We wish the greatest success for you in your upcoming responsibilities. We are absolutely sure that we are going to remember you and our duties and our activities in the inter-American system. A big hug, Madam Ambassador. Even though it's albeit virtual, I would have loved to have personally done it. Success.
We thank the distinguished representative of Colombia for his intervention, and we now recognize the Assistant Secretary General to speak.
Thank you very
Madam Ambassador, my dear Central American sister, on behalf of the Secretary General, the General Secretariat, I am honored to express gratitude to you for all your commitment, your work in this organization. We have no doubt that whatever paths you follow in the future, you'll do just as well as you did here at the OAS. We wish the best to you. You know, rest assured you always have your friends here at the House of the Americas. Thank you very much, and I hope and bid farewell.
We thank you, Assistant Secretary General, in this. And we now recognize Ambassador Sol de Paul. Ambassador.
Thank you. Your kind words, your wonderful, everything that you said about me. I was very touched by everything you said, and thank you. I really thank you very, very much. Mis sinceros agradecimientos a todos.
my sincere gratitude to all my colleagues, ambassadors, who have expressed their fond words to bid me farewell. The duty calls me elsewhere. My government is transferring me as ambassador to France and representative of El Salvador before the OECD and UNESCO, but to the beautiful city of Paris. And I thank France for congratulating me on this. My time before the OAS has been short but very intense. All the member states are confronting the scourge of COVID-19, the same devastation, the same human tragedies we're all facing. And as well as these natural disasters which have exacerbated the problems faced by our governments and the suffering of our population, the situation that's imposed on us by the pandemic of COVID would not have been what I'd wanted to leave in the midst of. And so this has been a very enriching and edifying experience, even though it was not exempt from technical difficulties, but it was wonderful for me, my mission, and of course for the organization. But in the midst of all the difficulties, the OAS has proved that it can and will adapt to new challenges to comply with its objectives and goals laid out by the states and as an organization. In this regard, is to be part of the first virtual General Assembly and Permanent Council meetings has been an amazing experience. Whether in person or virtual, the OAS will be the main a forum of political dialogue in the hemisphere and must remain so to provide support for our countries to recover once the pandemic passes. And with much optimism, we hope this becomes a reality soon. In the short time that I've headed this message, I tried to fulfill the mission of President Bukele, to reposition El Salvador in this organization, and we've been successful at it. I'm very grateful to my permanent representative colleagues, the Secretary General Almagro and Assistant Executive Secretary General Mendez, for the support they provided me. I'm leaving with the satisfaction of having contributed to the defense and promotion of the interests of my country in the inter-American context and the purposes of the organizations under its 4 pillars. I'm immensely grateful to each and every one of you who have expressed your affection and wishes for success. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Our dear Ambassador Soldepool, for your remarks. We wish you and your family every success in your future endeavors, and congratulations on your new posting. Thank you for your organization, your contributions to this organization, and all the very best to you. Thank you. Distinguished representatives, we'll now proceed to the last item on our agenda, other business. I now ask if there are any delegations that wish to bring any informative issues to the attention of the Council to do so now. We recognize the delegation of Nicaragua.
A continuación.
Next, the delegation of Nicaragua would like to read the press clip of the government of reconciliation and national unity, which reads as such: the day has come where when shadows have come of Ruben Darío verses after the death of Fidel, another Diego Maradona has died, just as Fidel has died as well. All of us who have deeply admired the irreverent Diego, we have been touched, moved by this news, but we know we all belong to the world beyond. It's our work and our steps in a brilliant celebration of life on here. It's light and truth for those of us who value and recognize, as all of us recognize, and we value Diego, the great, the universal one. As I still live, we all embrace, all of us who love Diego, his family, his friends, and we express our in his cosmic path and lighting up the sky immortally. Daniel Ortega Saavedra, Daniel Ortega, Vice President and President of the Republic. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We thank the distinguished representative of Nicaragua and now recognize the delegation of Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This delegation is taking the floor on this to refer to an event that is of great importance to Costa Rica, which is a landmark in the development of the country and in promoting democracy. Costa Rica, yesterday we held the anniversary of the historic decision to abolish our army. Costa Rica has shown over the 72 years since this happened that it is possible to live in peace. It's possible to build societies without the threat and using weapons, generating a civil conscience. So that's why our foreign policy has a commitment to peace, internet security, and multilateralism and disarmament. Costa Rica cannot support, nor will it participate in any military events. Costa Rican patriotism has to do more with its heroes and progress than the contributions of a military nature. This pacifist nature since 1984 has issued a proclamation of perpetual neutrality and non-armed position of Costa Rica to express once more its trust in institutions and instruments of international law of which it's a party to, and on repeated occasion has invoked, always following the civil and respectful path of international law to settle controversies. Costa Rica as a peaceful nation reaffirms to the world its relinquishment of the use of force and advocates dialogue for peaceful coexistence between nations. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We thank the distinguished delegation of Costa Rica and now recognize the delegation of Guatemala.
Ambassador Scioli, you're not on the screen. Could you refresh and you're now in your browser? Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of Guatemala takes advantage of this item on the agenda to convey that in the context of the events that have taken place recently in our country, the government of Dr. Alejandro Yamatei Falla, the President of the Republic, last November 26th, addressed the Secretary General of the OAS, Dr. Luis Almagro, to request assistance to strengthen and preserve the democratic institutional framework of the country as provided for in Article 17 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The delegation of Guatemala recalls in the Democratic Inter-American Charter is an instrument at the service of diplomacy, preventive diplomacy and democratic solidarity, which constitutes thus an effective tool to prevent crisis. In the context of Chapter 4 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which refers to strengthening and preservation of democratic institutional framework. Madam Chair, with regard as to this request from the government, we salute that the Secretary General will conduct a mission. And the mission was sent, and it was headed by Julio Coten, the ex-Secretary of Foreign Relations of Argentina, accompanied by experts from the General Secretariat of the organization. This mission was dispatched, and its purpose was to receive information from the institutions of the state and other bodies of the countries, as well as to conduct a fact-finding mission about the different institutions to address transparency, accountability, and general budget analysis of income and expenditures of the nation. The institutional coordinating committee that was set up is going to issue proposals that will be given to the different authorities for their evaluation. It is timely to point out that in June of this year, the President of the Republic conveyed to the Secretary General Almagro his initiative to launch a dialogue space and national consensus building effort between different sectors of Guatemalan society. For this purpose, there was accompaniment of the Secretary General of the organization to support this effort to create such a body, including establishing a technical secretariat for dialogue and discussion. This initiative was spearheaded by the Secretary General in order to strengthen democracy, and there is expertise and the capacity to be able to be successful. As Madam Chair, the government of the Republic of Guatemala, through the Ministry of Foreign Relations, reiterates its confidence in dialogue and promoting consensus between the different sectors of Guatemalan society. On this basis, on the basis of democratic institutions, accountability, transparency, and respect for human rights. On behalf of my government, I thank Secretary General Almagro and the special mission that was dispatched for responding to the request and its willingness to support the efforts of the Guatemalan government to conduct an inclusive dialogue which facilitates understanding between all the segments of society. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We thank the distinguished representative of Guatemala and now recognize the delegation of Venezuela.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to the ambassadors and alternate ambassadors. I apologize for taking a few additional minutes away from you at this meeting. It's been very long, but my delegation would like to express his deep rejection of the decisions that were recently taken by the government of Trinidad and Tobago against Venezuelan migrants in that country. Over months, we've seen with great concern the treatment has deteriorated of these migrants in Trinidad and Tobago. There's been more and more attacks against them, and human trafficking organizations have become involved as well. The asylum seekers have come to a place where their conditions place their lives in danger. And Prime Minister Roble and several members of the government have expressed themselves against these Venezuelans who are located there. Chair, since the 20th of November, the government of Trinidad had 25 people of Venezuelan nationality were expelled, and they found 16 minors and a baby, an infant, who are living in that country, alleging
Madam Chair, there is a request for a point of order.
We have a request from Trinidad and Tobago for a point of order. Trinidad and Tobago is recognized.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and I take the floor during this final item on an agenda during which many matters of great importance have been considered, of mutual interest, raised as we would expect in the multilateral context under which we consider such matters at the OAS. This delegation was careful to not use the floor unnecessarily, and therefore, on a point of order, the delegation would wish to understand the purpose for the intervention now requested by the purported representative of Venezuela, which, as all delegations will know, is the language used by this delegation in its non-recognition of the personality requesting the floor. Other business, as we understand it, is a matter of information. This appears to not be a matter of information. This appears to be a matter that at some point would expectedly warrant a response from this delegation. This delegation is also not aware that under matters of information of this type, the delegations are expected to enter into the internal affairs of any member state. And the statements now being made are in violation of those understandings by this delegation of the purpose for which we gather in this important hemispheric multilateral organization. And therefore, we wish to raise and place on record our objection to the remarks being made, bearing in mind that we will have no further comment and participation in this meeting from this moment. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We thank the distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago for his intervention, and his objection is noted.
¿Puedo proseguir, señora?
May I proceed, Madam Chair? May I proceed? Shall I continue? I am immensely concerned to hear from the representative of Trinidad and Tobago that the items I'm raising here are not of interest. That these are internal affairs of Trinidad and Tobago, and they're unnecessary. When human rights violations are involved, there's no limits, there's no borders, no boundaries. And to shield oneself behind non-interference in a country, I was starting to say how on the 22nd of November, the government of Trinidad and Tobago expelled in a boat, a small boat, we could say almost like a canoe. 25 Venezuelan migrants, 16 were minors, and there was even, and sent them all to Venezuela in turbulent waters into the Orinoco Strait, and where they were highly imperiled. They disappeared for 48 hours. Fortunately, they were able to return safe and sound to Trinidad. But in statements from the Prime Minister Roll and other government officials who said, they said that it was a sovereign decision of an internal decision. This was called that there's no legal technicalities that justifies sending these kids off to open sea in danger. This is an international organization, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights and the UN human rights body as well has urged, called on Trinidad to accept these people independently of their legal migratory status. We view this with concern. Trinidad is turning a deaf ear to this, but if it continues with such a policy as it did yesterday, and as it's shown with this, the 160 Venezuelan immigrants that it's deported as well, we think we're grateful to other countries that have had difficulties with Venezuelan immigrants have not closed their door, and we're grateful for this to them. They haven't denied basic rights to these Venezuelans either. We can't forget either that there's 6 million Venezuelans who have left their country, has left their property, their country behind because of the crisis created by the usurping government of Nicolas Maduro. Madam Chair, we want to remind you that at another time, Venezuela had an open door policy to immigrants that came from all parts of the planet, including thousands of Trinidadians who came. We call on the government of Trinidad and Tobago to extend the same considerations to our citizens in the midst of the socioeconomic crisis that we're undergoing, and allow them to live safely and with dignity in their country. We call on the government of Trinidad and Tobago to do this. Venezuelan migrants have been the targets of all sorts of mistreatment and misdoings in Trinidad and Tobago. We would like to continue to use the mechanisms in multilateral structures to be able to avoid this. That's all I wanted to say, Madam Chair.
We note the intervention of the distinguished representative of Venezuela. I am not sure. Is there another request from Trinidad and Tobago? Oh. Okay, all right. The distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, again, I note that the objection raised by this delegation does not appear to have been ruled on, and we wish to reiterate that in the continued remarks made, the content certainly was not a matter to be considered under other business, since it was a statement calling on another member state, expecting a member state to respond. This delegation will be ready to be guided, but this is not the type of matter that we understand in our rules of procedure are meant to be raised under other business. And we reiterate and register again our objection on a point of order to the statement that has been made and would wish to have our objection recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We thank the distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago, and the objection on the point of order is noted, but I'll call on Assistant Secretary General Ambassador Mendes to also clarify if there are any other procedures to guide the chair on this intervention.
Madam Chair, both interventions have been completed. You have recorded what was stated as this is for information purposes only, but we have taken note of what was said. I don't think anything else needs to proceed on this matter. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary General. We have now come to the end of the agenda and for today's meeting, and I want to thank everyone for your patience. This was a long meeting, and for your fulsome participation, as it was also a very productive meeting. There being no further business to consider, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.